January 2nd, 1869. A massive explosion echoed through the streets of London. Shattered glass and burning gas rained down on the pavement. A police officer operating the new machine stood there, his face badly burned, his clothes on fire. The device responsible for this carnage was not a steam engine or a factory boiler. It was a traffic light, and there was not a single automobile on the road. That was in 1869. But the story of the traffic light begins years earlier, born from a crisis of a completely different kind. Long before the internal combustion engine, the greatest threat to human life in a city was the horse. In the middle of the 19th century, London was the capital of an empire, and it was choking on its own success. The streets were a chaotic nightmare of horse-drawn carriages, omnibuses, carts, and thousands of pedestrians. The population had exploded, but the infrastructure had not changed since the Middle Ages. The noise was deafening, the smell was unbearable, and the death toll was staggering. Thousands of horses dropped dead in the streets every year from sheer exhaustion, their carcasses left to rot until they could be dragged away. Crossing an intersection was a game of chance. There were no rules, no patterns, and no right of way. It was pure anarchy. The British government knew they had a crisis on their hands. They needed a way to control the flow of traffic without bringing the entire city to a halt. They turned to the railways. The railroad industry had already solved a version of this problem. They used semaphore systems, large mechanical arms that pivoted on a post to signal whether a train should stop or proceed. A railway engineer named John Knight was tasked with adapting this concept for the streets of London. Knight was a visionary. He did not know the word traffic engineering. It did not exist yet, but he engineered a solution anyway. He designed a tall pillar to be placed at the intersection of Great George Street and Bridge Street, right outside the Houses of Parliament. At the top of the pillar were two movable arms, just like a railway signal. During the day, the arms would lower to signal stop, and raise at a 45-degree angle to signal caution. But Knight also needed a system for the night, when the arms would be invisible. He turned to gaslight. The pillars were fitted with red and green gas lanterns. Red meant stop. Green meant caution. The entire mechanism was operated manually by a police officer standing at the base of the pillar, turning a lever to control the flow of horse traffic. It was a brilliant marriage of mechanical engineering and public safety. But bringing open gas flames into the middle of a crowded city was a gamble. And the house was about to lose. The first installation went up on December 10th, 1868. It was an immediate sensation. The Times of London reported that the new signal had successfully untangled one of the most dangerous intersections in the city. Carriages stopped, pedestrians crossed. For a few brief weeks, John Knight had conquered the chaos of Victorian London. His invention was poised to become the standard for every major city in the world. The railway semaphore had become the ruler of the streets. It established the most fundamental rule of modern urban life, that movement must be dictated by a central authority. But the technology of the era was fragile. The gas lamps required a constant supply of fuel, fed through underground pipes. The mechanical arms were exposed to the harsh English weather. And the police officer operating the signal was standing next to a highly combustible gas leak, just waiting for a spark. It didn't take long for the system to fail. That decision to use gaslight seemed practical at the time. It wasn't. The explosion in January of 1869 shattered more than just the traffic pillar. It shattered public confidence. The project was immediately scrapped. John Knight died later that year, his vision seemingly buried with him. For the next 4 decades, the traffic light vanished. Cities went back to the chaotic free-for-all of horse-drawn traffic. But the world was changing. In the late 1880s, Carl Benz introduced the first true automobile. At first, these machines were a novelty for the rich. They were loud, slow, and broke down constantly. But they multiplied. By the early 1900s, cars were no longer a toy. They were a threat. The streets of American cities were suddenly filled with a new kind of danger. A horse might trample you, but a car could run you over at 30 miles per hour and keep going. The accident rates skyrocketed. Cities desperately needed a way to separate the cars from the pedestrians. In 1912, a police officer in Salt Lake City named Lester Wire had enough. He took a wooden box, painted it yellow, and mounted it on a pole. Inside, he rigged up 2 light bulbs, one red and one green, connected to a manual switch. He stood in the middle of the street and flipped the switch. It was crude. It was dangerous. But it was the first electric traffic light. That decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't. The early electric signals were met with intense suspicion. People did not trust machines to tell them what to do. Drivers ignored them. Pedestrians crossed against them. The lights were often operated by police officers who had to manually flip a switch for every cycle. It was a tedious job that required perfect timing, and the timing was usually wrong. The problem was the transition. Going from green to red without warning caused massive pileups. Drivers would slam on their brakes, causing the car behind them to crash. There was no buffer, no time to react. The system was failing. In the early 1920s, Detroit was the car capital of the world, and it had the highest accident rate in the country. A police officer named William Potts decided to fix the problem. He took 3 colors, red, yellow, and green, and wired them together using telephone relays and electrical wire. He mounted the contraption on a wooden pole at a major intersection. The yellow light was the missing piece. It provided the buffer, the time to slow down. But Potts never patented his invention. The city of Detroit just copied it and installed them everywhere. The traffic light was finally becoming a standard fixture, but there was no uniformity. Some cities used red for go. Some used yellow for stop. It was absolute chaos. And here is where the history gets dark. The 1920s were a bloodbath. The automobile had transformed from a convenience into a killing machine. In 1925 alone, the United States recorded over 20,000 traffic deaths. The victims were not just drivers. They were children playing in the streets. They were pedestrians who had always assumed the roads belonged to them. The car companies and the government launched a massive propaganda campaign to shift the blame. They coined the term jaywalker. A jay was a slang term for a foolish person. If you got hit by a car, it was your fault for being a jaywalker, not the driver's fault for speeding. The streets were stolen from the people and handed over to the machines. The traffic light was the physical manifestation of this surrender. It was no longer just a tool for flow. It was a weapon of enforcement, a silent dictator standing on the corner. And the human cost did not end there. In 1923, an inventor named Garrett Morgan patented a manually operated traffic signal. It was a brilliant T-shaped design that allowed for a third position, a warning state where all traffic stopped to let pedestrians cross safely. Morgan was a black inventor who had seen a horrific accident between a car and a horse-drawn carriage. He sold the rights to his patent to General Electric for $40,000, about $700,000 in today's money. General Electric took the design and mass-produced it. The technology spread across the country, but the money and the credit largely bypassed the man who helped save countless lives. The human element was being stripped away from the machine, and that was exactly the point. If you are finding this history interesting, subscribe to the channel. Here at Common Lore, we tell stories like this every week, and you will not want to miss what comes next. By the 1930s, the traffic light was no longer just an American phenomenon. It was a global necessity. But the lack of standardization was causing international incidents. A driver from France might drive into Germany and have no idea what the lights meant. The League of Nations stepped in. They pushed for a universal code. Red would mean stop. Green would mean go. Yellow would mean caution. It seems obvious now, but it took years of arguing to get there. The traffic light was literally redrawing the map of urban planning. You could not build a city without them. The concept of the suburb, the vast expansion of cities outward, was only possible because intersections could be controlled. If every driver had to stop and negotiate right of way, traffic would never move. The traffic light allowed for speed, and speed allowed for distance. The entire layout of the modern world, the sprawling highways, the shopping malls, the office parks, All of it traces back to that metal pole standing on the corner. But the mechanical clicks of the early lights were about to be replaced by something far more calculating. The transition from manual to automated lights happened slowly. Early automated lights used mechanical timers. They would stay green for a fixed amount of time, regardless of whether there were any cars on the road. You could sit at a red light for 5 minutes in the middle of the night, staring at an empty street. It was inefficient and frustrating. The real revolution came in the 1960s and 70s with the introduction of the inductive loop. A coil of wire is buried in the pavement. When a large mass of metal, like a car, drives over it, it changes the magnetic field. That change sends a signal to the computer controlling the light. The light turns green. The machine could now sense the car. Today, the scale of this technology is almost unimaginable. There are over 300,000 traffic lights in the United States alone. They manage billions of trips every year. The old incandescent bulbs, which burned out constantly and required armies of maintenance workers, have been replaced by LED arrays that can last for a decade. But the system is no longer just about stopping and going. It is a vast interconnected network. And this is the part that catches people off guard. Modern traffic lights are connected to GPS satellites. They talk to emergency vehicles, turning lights green for ambulances and fire trucks before they even reach the intersection. They adjust their timing based on real-time traffic data, optimizing flow to reduce emissions. Some cities are experimenting with systems that communicate directly with the cars themselves. The car tells the light how fast it is going, and the light tells the car what speed to maintain to hit a green wave. The traffic light has become a node in a global digital brain. But for all this technology, the fundamental interaction remains the same. A person in a machine, waiting for a color to change. Think back to that cold January morning in 1869. A police officer standing in the streets of London, his face burned by an exploding gas lamp. He was trying to bring order to a world that was moving faster than it could handle. The machine he operated failed him. But the idea survived. It was ignored. It was feared. It exploded. It tamed cities. The traffic light is the invisible architecture of our daily lives. You probably passed through 3 or 4 of them just today without a second thought. You sat there, watching the red glow, waiting for the green. It is a moment of forced patience in a world that demands constant motion. A reminder that sometimes, progress means knowing when to stop. If this story surprised you, subscribe to Common Law and tell us in the comments which part of the history of the traffic light surprised you the most. And leave your like so more people can find this video.